Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Deborah, and I'm a member of the York County Historical Committee who is hosting this lecture series today. We work under the Board of Supervisors for York County and are involved in a variety of events and planning for York County. So a couple of announcements before we get started. This lecture will be about an hour with time for questions at the end. We do record all of these lectures, so just be aware of that. If you do need to leave the room, the restrooms are down the stairs. And a couple of other things. We do have a lecture series this fall and then one in the spring. Our next lecture is October 9th or 2nd, I can't remember. But it'll be the first Sunday in October, and that's by Frank Garman from Christopher Newport University. And he's talking about his recent book about a con man who was a spy as well in the Civil War in the Gilded Age. What else? We'd also love for you to sign up for our email list outside if you're not part of our emails, that you can be aware of future lectures. And we also have a special book for sale from about York County, and it's $20, and it's a great resource if you want to know anything about York County. It's for sale in the gallery, so you can look at them up here and then pay for them downstairs. Okay, well, it's my pleasure now to introduce our speaker for today, John Pagano. So a little bit about John. He's from upstate New York originally, where he received his BA in history at the State University of New York at New Paltz. After 8 years of teaching and then several years working at various historical sites from Pennsylvania to Georgia, John became an outreach educator for the Jamestown Yorktown Foundation. And while working as a teacher and museum professional, John was also a film and documentary consultant and advisor, as well as the author of dozens of magazine articles on various topics on military and United States history. He's also for many years been the historical interpretation supervisor at Henricus Historical Park in Chester, Virginia, where he's focused on the interpretation of Pocahontas' life and Reverend Alexander Whitaker. Where he also went with the delegation to England for the commemoration of her death, right? He's also now been promoted to Chesterfield County Historical Division site supervisor. So he's over many different sites in Chesterfield County. I also count him as one of my close friends, and he's a wonderful speaker and historian and living history and public historian. So here's John.
Nice. All right, so I am mic'd. Usually I don't need a mic, but they wanted me to have one. So if I get too loud at some point, just kind of signal me. So thank you for the introduction, and I was pretty happy when she asked me, like, do you want to do a presentation down in Yorktown? I'm like, sure, let's do it. I just had trouble like picking a topic, like what one do we do? So the one that we chose is one that I've delivered now this will be my 4th county that I've done this, various historical societies. And the topic is one that it started for me when I grew up just a few miles from Washington's Army's last encampment in the Hudson Valley. The place is called the New Windsor Cantonment. And so his army was there in 1782. And I studied and knew as much as I could about that place and who was there. Of course, when I was a young child, during the bicentennial and beyond, something that I learned, read, saw, and probably took for granted was that George Washington's army was integrated. I didn't later on realize that was something special. I just thought that's what the armies did. So when we get back to this topic today, and after so many years of me doing research and the work that I'm doing, I put together a presentation for 2 reasons. One, that in my committee work in Chesterfield County, I oversee what is the Chesterfield Barracks, which is where all Virginians came in 1780 and 81 to train to go to the Army. So that's in Chesterfield County. And in looking over the records and the pensions of the people that were there, one thing that strikes me, and strikes probably a lot of people, is that those are filing for pension are both white and black. They are soldiers, and they are integrated, and they are serving in the same huts together. They are getting the same rations together. They are drilling together, and they go to the battlefield and fight together. And that always kind of, and has always stuck with me, because I remember somewhere someone told me that the American Army wasn't integrated till Korea. And that's just a lie. It's not true. It's just maybe one of those facts that gets kind of shuffled around. It's not kind of accurate, maybe in a modern sense, but not really in a historical sense. So when we look at this, I'm going to address a couple of things with this topic. First thing is, we're not going to cover everything today. There's no way I can get through this in 1 hour. So I'm going to give you a glance, just a kind of an introductory of what I've come to know, and maybe what will illuminate more to folks who like the period. If you're new to the Revolution, it's probably going to be a lot of very new material. All right, so I'll give you that warning. So first thing I want to start with is the painting that I have in my opening slide. That is by an artist in Connecticut. His name is Don Triani, who when I was younger, thinner, I used to model for. But he wanted to depict the Rhode Island Regiment of Washington's Army marching down Duke of Gloucester Street. And so the Rhode Islanders, they were about 100 or so black men. They had consolidated into one battalion, both white and black. But can you imagine to the free and enslaved people of Williamsburg to see that marching down the street? All right? These are definitively soldiers that won this country their independence. Yet many times after this, they'll be considering why all of our people are not free yet. Right? It's another topic within the topic. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of do, again, a brief introduction. When you look at these soldiers, they are there from the very beginning. The reason why I addressed today, 1775, to which we're in the 250th. This is what your early 250 years ago, what a Virginia soldier dressed like and looked like when his first days were in the militia, becoming a Continental soldier. All right? It is not really all about looking like this guy in the painting, right, years later. But one of those guys that's going to turn out that becomes quite famous, certainly to me and to the others that study the period, is William Flora of Princess Anne County. William Flora is a black man. He's a free black man from the area around Portsmouth. And he just happens in December of 1775 to be on picket duty out in front of the Redcoats at the Battle of Great Bridge, when his comrades, his white comrades, fire a shot and run. He stays there, fires 5, 6, 7, 8 rounds at the Redcoats. So from the very beginning in 1775, we're going to be looking at these men, like William Flora and others, who fought well for their country's independence, right? So just to review, remember, there's 13 British colonies in 1775. Virginia is one of them. 13 colonies. Almost all of them had slaves. Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, everybody. So the question is, especially in the southern colonies where the slavery is numerous, who will fight? You're a free black man? Is that different than being an enslaved black man? Yes. All right, we'll get to that. Everybody should know who this guy is, right? Now, I don't know if you like political radicals or not, today or then. It's not me to ask. But if you were in the same room with Patrick Henry 250 years ago, you would clearly know where he stood on things. So when you look at his words at St. John's Church in Richmond, when you hear "give me liberty" or "give me death," that is not the harshest part of his presentation that day. All right? There was no shots at Lexington Green yet. And Patrick Henry is saying we need to arm and we need to fight against the crown. All right? So you read his life. Right? Is life so dear, peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. So the question is, back again to the central topic. free men of Virginia who are black, they already have their freedom. What about others? So shots are fired at Lexington Green, April 19, 1775. The war has begun. All right? If you are a black resident of Virginia and you know this war is beginning, is it in your mind this war could change the fortunes of not just you and your free family, but your enslaved cousins and friends? You have to think about that, right? So I want to go over this real quick. Virginia's militia law is going to clearly state a simple fact. It says, the citizens of this commonwealth into a militia disciplining the same for defense thereof, be it enacted by the General Assembly of the Commonwealth of Virginia, again, that all free males, all free persons, all free male persons, hired servants and apprentices between the ages of 16 and 50 years. So again, if you are a free black man living in York County, Culpeper County, any county, it is the law that you serve in your militia, just like any white neighbor. That makes you equals in the eyes of local government. Maybe not socially, but militarily, civically, you're equals. Right? There it is. Slaves, not so much. If you're a black slave man, no. Different social order. Back to that topic. Integrated, yes. Yes. Where did this thing start? Why are they integrated? Because it's English law. The English do not care what skin color you have in their militia law. If you are a citizen of that English community on the eve of the Revolution, you are obligated to serve. Pacifism is not allowed under English law. Do you know that? Maybe not. Maybe not. That's why they don't like the Quakers very much. Nobody likes the Quakers. Except for the Quakers. All right. Back to this guy. There he is, William Flora. Actually, I don't think that's really William Flora, but that's another guy from another artist depiction. But yes, he's a business owner, right? He's a business owner. And he's got his 2 different businesses that he operates. He's a skilled man. So he's going to join the Princess Anne militia. He'll be fighting in all the battles nearby, especially the Battle of Great Bridge on December 9th, 1775. And then after that, he's going to join the Continental Army. Winds up at Valley Forge. We'll get to that. However, it should be not lost that because the local leaders for this Continental Army and the American forces, they do not put out at first the pledge that if you are a slave and you want to earn your freedom, you can join the army and we will grant you your freedom for that service. That didn't happen quickly. And it doesn't, it won't. But the British were ahead of the Americans on that, especially with Lord Dunmore here in 1775. So if you're living around this region and you hear that Lord Dunmore, the British governor, is like, hey, if you're a slave, make it to my camp, not only will you be free, but we're going to arm you. You have what he calls the Royal Ethiopian Regiment. He chose that name, by the way. All right, so if you're a black man and you're enslaved, you now have a choice in your head you have to make. Do I wait for the American cause that possibly could give me my freedom if I serve and I don't know what's going to happen after that? Or the British said, I'm going to get it and I can do it right now. Which one are you going to choose? We know it. Yeah, we know, right? There's hundreds of people that flock to Dunmore. Got it. All right. So there we go. So you start looking at these guys who did serve, who did enlist, joined up, right? Nathan Fry. He's in the Henrico Mid Battalion, and he is going to write in his pension that I was born free in the county of Westmoreland, enlisted in the minute service under Duval of Henrico County, And in the year 1775, went to Savannah in Georgia, served under Colonel Elbert against the Creek Indians. Capacity of drummer, returned from Savannah and joined the Army, Valley Forge. Was in action at Monmouth, June of 1778. Not only was this guy so motivated to join up and go all the way to Savannah and fight Indians there, but when he's done with that unit, he makes his way to Valley Forge to join the Army in Pennsylvania. Who's that motivated? This guy, right? So there are motivations, extreme motivations at times. So what does Washington say about this? It really comes under him. General Washington has to make a decision for everybody. That's the burden of command that he has. There might be some people in his army who do not like the idea of black men serving with them, especially the planter class. So Washington, who's from that class, has to make the decision. And he writes, "It has been represented to me that the free Negroes who have served in this army are very much dissatisfied at being discharged, or discarded in this case, as is to be apprehended that they may seek employ in the ministerial army, British. I have presumed to depart from the resolution respecting them and have given license for them being enlisted. If this is disapproved of by Congress, I will put a stop to it." So Washington is saying, I'm cool with it. If Congress says no, I'll enforce that. Congress says nothing about it. They leave it to him. And he chose, black men will be in my army. Now, if you want to know Washington's views on race, how he was and maybe what he changed into, just read his communications with Phillis Wheatley. Imagine a planter class Virginian inviting a black girl to his camp to hang out with him. All right, so Phillis Wheatley is a fan of General Washington. If you ever read her poetry, it is crazy insane how smart and intelligent that woman got, self-educated, and with her owners, her people who owned her, to the level of poetry that that woman accomplished. It's crazy to think about. So Washington, after she sends this letter, he's going to respond to her. Hey, I want to, what do you think? You want to meet up, hang out? Miss Phyllis, if you should ever come to Cambridge or near headquarters, I shall be happy to see a person so favored by the muses and to whom nature has been so liberal and beneficial in her dispensations. I am, with great respect, your obedient, humble servant, George Washington. That's a big deal. I'm probably one of a few thousand people on the planet who ever read that letter, I guess. Maybe. Now there's this guy, Thomas Jefferson. So we all know, July 4th, 1776, there is the Declaration of Independence, which now changes the war from a rebellion against the king, which that's what it was. We're going to kill redcoats because we're angry. Right? To an idea now that we can form our own country. So now it shifts from these black men being rebels to being patriots to a country that they will win a victory for, mind you. All right? So when we think about this, what about slavery? What about slavery? I mean, I don't know. What would it be like to be a black man who's free, serving in a company of continental soldiers next to a guy who owned slaves? What would that conversation be like? So some of them, like John Lawrence, the Lawrence family of South Carolina, he wrote on it. So there's John Lawrence. Lawrence, his father, they're from the planter class, the merchant class of Charleston, South Carolina. Now, where Mr. Lawrence made a mistake with his son, who will soon be one of Washington's aides, is that it was, of course, normal to send your young son from the planter class to England to get an education. When his son, young Lawrence, goes to London and other places, he meets up with abolitionists who shape his thinking. His idea of race is going to change by being introduced to those who had different views on it. So if you read his stuff right there, he's very clear what he thinks. He'll ask his father, can we form a 3,000-man brigade of South Carolina slaves? We'll finish the war once and for all. 3,000, that's all we need. Offer those slaves their freedom. We're going to tear the heart out of the Redcoats army. His father? No. Sorry, not at that point yet. So that's what Lawrence is looking at. But if you read his letters, and remember, he is sitting there at Washington's dinner tables. So is Alexander Hamilton, James Monroe. They're all there. All these guys are going to have their views of race and slavery changed by the Revolution. Okay? So let me give you this guy. I just throw him in here for fun. Joseph Jones. He is a Virginia, Continental Congress, close friend of Jefferson. This is what he writes. The freedom of these people is a great and desirable object. To have a clear view of it would be happy for Virginia. By the way, W-O-D is how he spelled it, not me. All right, I'm just making sure. I don't have a typo up there. To have a clear view of it would be happy for Virginia, but whenever it is attempted, it must be, I conceive, by some gradual course allowing time as they go off for laborers to take their places, or we shall suffer exceedingly under the sudden revolution. So what Jones is saying in the middle of the revolution, in 1780, is that we should have a plan for gradual emancipation right now. Right now. Because if we decide to end it at the end of this revolution and we allow everybody to be free, that could be an overload. You should read his correspondence to Jefferson. It's very interesting that way. So you can see that people inside Virginia, they see that the handwriting is on the wall. Slavery is on its way out with the revolution. So the question is, well, how many of these men were there? General Washington must have been really curious, because he asked his staff to do a return. How many black men are in my army? Because I probably see them all over the place. There is one officer in the Continental Army who went through a parade ground and referred to the army as a salt and pepper army because of the white and black element together. Washington wanted to know how many, and if you go look at that number, at the end of Valley Forge, not the beginning of the campaign of 1777 that wound up at Valley Forge, there is 755 black men in an army that had been whittled down by the Philadelphia campaign, by the hardships of Valley Forge. And at the end of that, there's still 755 black men under arms in the ranks of the army. What was the number going into Valley Forge? If you do normal attrition of the army, all of the men, that number is probably closer to 1,000, which means that there's in the army about 1 in 10 black men. 10%. Somewhere in there. 162 Virginians, the 3 brigades that are represented on that list. Now, I've seen numbers published in very haughty places that have been published recently, where they're saying how many free black men are in Virginia, or how many free black families are in Virginia. And I've seen numbers that are terribly calculated, because if I know that there's probably 200 plus free black men serving in the Continental Army from Virginia, you can do the math on how big their families are and how many free blacks are in Virginia at that time. It's hard to calculate, though. It's very hard. I'm going to leave that caveat there. But so basically, people ask, what's the proof these men were in the army? Like, Washington wanted proof too. And there it is. All right. So let's get to Valley Forge. I remember reading this deserter description years ago, and I fell in love with it. One, it describes the soldier's gear, his clothing, everything. So it's in a Pennsylvania newspaper, and of course, Colonel John Gibson of the 6th Virginia, He's the one putting the ad in. He wants his people back, the deserters. One of those deserters, coming from Captain Nathaniel Fox Company of the 6th Virginia. James Anderson, a black soldier, 6 feet high, about 40 years of age. Rather square made, had on when he went away a light gray cloth coat and waistcoat, a coat faced with green, a pair of Osnabrück overalls, a small round hat with a piece of bear skin on it, of course. He took with him a pair of leather breeches, had clean his firelock, cartridge box, and a new Dutch blanket. That's a lot of stuff. He is a ditcher by trade, and it is probable will endeavor to get employment in the state. Whoever apprehends said deserter and delivers him to the same officer of the regiment, secures him, so that he may be brought to his regiment again, shall receive $20 reward. Let's put that in perspective. Continental soldier gets $6 2/3 a month. So if you're getting this guy back to camp, you're getting the equivalent of 3 to 4 months pay. So a couple things with this. It says ditcher by trade. Trade means tradesman. He's a free man, right? Ditcher by trade. The other thing that's really curious is that, again, unless somebody like me who's a really big nerd for this stuff, he's got to ask the question, why and how would he have a piece of bear on his hat? Right? Some of you who really studied the Revolution in this room probably know that there's only certain troops that get to wear bear on their hat in George Washington's army. Anybody know who they are? The only ones. That would be George Washington's headquarters guard. All their hats have bear fur on them. Now, we don't have a lot of rosters of George Washington's headquarters guards around this time. Some, but not all. But if you remember, George Washington's headquarters guard, the life guard, are entirely Virginians, commanded by a Massachusetts officer. That's the rule that Washington put in there. Why do you do that? Politics, right? So Washington's life guard are all Virginians. This guy's 6 feet tall. This guy is wearing bear on his hat. I'm going to take a guess he was in Washington's guard. Probably said, enough's enough, I'm going home, or I'm leaving. It's kind of interesting to think about if he was in Washington's headquarters guard. All right, so Virginia. Let's shift away from Valley Forge. Virginia's a target. By 1779, 1780, the Revolution came south. Savannah, the Charleston, it's coming up to Virginia. So when you look at this question, right, it was a constant divide between enslaved people, freed by the British, and free black Virginians who served in the ranks. The British were doing 80 years before Lincoln and General Sherman did it into policy. How do you weaken the American cause? How do you weaken the Confederate cause? You take the enslaved people away, you take away the infrastructure of sustenance and supply for the armies. The British knew that. They were doing it since the beginning. But man, are they going to really put the hammer down when they come south. Anywhere they go, they liberate. So now if they're liberating for, black men, back to what's their army going to look like, right? So let's put you at the Chesterfield Continental Army Barracks, 1780, 1781. All of the Virginians of the Continental Line that were at Valley Forge, all of them, were ordered eventually to march to Charleston, South Carolina. I want you to imagine that 850-mile march. They come through Virginia. Since they left the border of New York and New Jersey, they had not stepped foot on soil that was not snowed on until they got into Virginia. They come through, they get to Charleston. Eventually, General Benjamin Lincoln surrenders his army. They're all gone. Virginia has to have a new Virginia line. Governor Jefferson says, let's make a rendezvous at Chesterfield Courthouse. So now all of Virginia, all of them, no matter what county you're from, you're one of those soldiers, you're coming to Chesterfield, including these black men. And there, for some reason, somebody was like, let's have a roster, return exactly who they are. And it's the only one you get in Virginia. And that started in 1780. We know exactly every man that went through the Chesterfield courthouse, including those who were black men. Wait, I'm sorry. It's not true. The Continental Army never had anything on their rosters for race. Never. You don't join the Army and they put black or white. Nothing like that. What they do put, so they know they can track you down as a deserter, is a physical description. But they still don't put race. What they put is height, eye color, complexion. Complexion is on there. So we kind of have an idea, but not a full one, of who was there. But the numbers, somewhere, again, 5%, maybe closer to 10%. Not sure exactly. The only way you know is by their pensions, because they will say on all their pensions, I was a free black man or I was an enslaved man. Right? But those recruits, they're going to join the Virginia State Regiment, which is artillery. Green's Battalion, Hawes, Gaskins, all these guys, including Gaskins. Gaskins was the only Virginia unit. Well, some of the artillery was here. Greens and Hawes, they'll go fight with General Greene in North Carolina. Gaskins, those guys are here at Yorktown. Right? So there is some of these free black Virginians in Gaskins Battalion in the trenches with General Steuben, right there in the center. Get to that in a minute. I'm going to bring you back to the conditions at Chesterfield Courthouse. I want you to know what these white and black men who lived in the same huts together, what they experienced. This is one of the letters coming out of that winter camp, those huts. It is Colonel William Davies who writes January 1781. He says, many men have not a remnant of clothing larger than a good napkin to cover their nakedness, and a number of these are dependent upon others for part of a blanket to shelter them at night from the cold. General Steuben will write Jefferson that these men at Chesterfield are dying by inches. So the way he wrote it. All right, so I'm reinforcing the point that we're both white and black Virginians suffering and enduring this together. Right? I didn't want to do that. Try again, John. Okay, there we go. All right. All right. Where would I point this? There. Okay. So that's the uniform of Gaskins Battalion when they were at Yorktown. I've recreated it. It's this one here on the table, exactly based off the descriptions of what they're wearing. One of those men is Jesse Wood, an artist Don Triani from Connecticut. And one of his profile paintings, this guy, he chose to present a black man in Gaskins Battalion on his post outside Yorktown. So who's Jesse Wood? Jesse Wood's one of my favorite pensioners. Jesse Wood, a free black young man, when he was at Chesterfield Courthouse, they wrote down his description. He is 16 years old, 4'10". See that musket over there? He's not much taller than that musket, all right? He's a planter by trade, born in Hanover County, Virginia, resides in King William County, black hair, black eyes, and his complexion is written as yellow. So probably because he was a tiny guy, they took him from his company and he became a part of the clothier department. He's going to be a part of a supply unit, right? So he's going to be on wagons taking uniforms back and forth to the troops all over the place. All right? His pension wrote, at the bottom I put a quote from his pension, that from Chesterfield, Captain Peyton removed the stores under his charge to Charlottesville, from thence to Albemarle Courthouse, crossed the James River and English Ferry, and to the county of Buckingham, thence up the James River, recrossed the river, and on to stand in the county of Augusta, remained there until the surrender of Cornwallis, and he goes on, and then he is going to be at the barracks after Yorktown at Point of Rocks on the confluence of the Fluvanna and Rivanna rivers. So this guy had drew the lucky straw, man. Instead of being under fire at Yorktown, he's just running uniforms from the Shenandoah Valley to here. Anyway, neat guy, Jesse Wood. So the siege of Yorktown. Here we are. These are the units that have black men serving in them here on this ground. Gaskin's Continental Battalion, Lieutenant Colonel Dabney's State Legion, neat unit. Posey's company of a lot of veteran Continentals with new recruits. The Virginia Militia, hundreds of guys. And the Virginia State Artillery, black men served there as well. So when you think about this, there's a lot of the black community represented here at Yorktown. And then we're going to thank a little, I call him little, I have no idea how tall he was. So there is a French officer by the name of Antoine de Vergès. And he is going to be serving here at Yorktown. He's just going to, I'm going to show you how talented an artist I am by depicting some American soldiers. And he is going to depict a Rhode Island soldier, far left, a New Jersey Continental soldier, brown uniform. Now let's see if you can find the Virginian. Does it stand out? All right, so that is a Virginia Continental Rifleman. What they did is they took a lot of the Continental Riflemen, or I should say, the Southwestern Virginia guys who drank very special water, right? These are guys who won at Kings Mountain, fighting Cherokee, all kinds of stuff. But so many of them were so popular to the commanders and the governors. They wanted them, not just out in the frontier. They wanted them here. So they do come. And now they're put on the Continental Army establishment. All right? So he's wearing soldiers' overalls, but everything else he's wearing. All right. So the guy on the right, he is a Continental Army artilleryman. So the fact is, it's a simple fact. One of the things I love kind of winding down with. There is no doubt that black men served in the Army, the militia, and won us our independence. There's no doubt about that. So the question is, what's going to happen after? What's going to happen after? That's the big one, right? You got to give it to the Virginia Assembly. 1783, they honored what they could honor. It says, "Be it therefore enacted that each and every slave, who by the appointment and direction of his owner hath enlisted in any of the regiment or corps raised within the state, either a continental or state establishment, hath been received as a substitute for any free person whose duty allotted it was to serve in said regiment or such regiment or corps, hath served faithfully during the term of enlistment, hath been discharged from such service by some officer duly authorized to grant such discharge, shall from and all after this act be fully and completely emancipated and shall be deemed free." So in 1783, if you were a black man who served and you were a slave, Virginia Assembly's like, no more. If you're a slave owner, you got to give them up. That's the law. You guys in the room have heard of James Lafayette, right? The question is, what was he? He didn't wear a uniform, right? Didn't wear a uniform, didn't carry a musket, didn't carry a sword. He was a spy. So that was a little bit nuanced, a little different. But he does get it, okay? So Virginia is going to look at this and go, if you were a man who was enslaved, you are now free because of your service. There he is. All right, so James Lafayette, James Armistead Lafayette, James Armistead, everybody's heard of him. He is where this story often starts from because people have heard of him. What about the others, right? All right, I want you to look at the dates. The pensions are everything. If we don't have the pensions and these guys who wrote these things down, we wouldn't know a thing about who they were. So in 1818, Congress approves a plan for these guys who served. I want you to start doing the math in your head. Presuming, let's take the youngest, 1781, Most of your Continental soldiers might have been born around 1761. Now start doing the math on 1818. How old are they? So between 1818 and 1836, it now says it's a congressional approval for widows. Because by then, what's happening to all the veterans? They're dying. So what does the pension laws really go to, right? All black soldiers receive the same expectation that they would get the same thing as white soldiers. And that's the truth. That's what they did get, right? So when you read their pensions, almost all of them will say that phrase, free men of color. Why? Because they have to, at the time, in the 1820s and 30s, make sure everybody knows that they were free people, not enslaved. Because everybody in that time was like, you're a slave, you have no rights. All right? This is the one that, this is a guy named Thomas Mason. Thomas Mason captured the Battle of Camden, August of 1780. Fought in other skirmishes. He served in the North Carolina militia, but he retires in Virginia. So when Mason wants to get his pension, he has to petition first the local courthouse in Virginia. He has to go to an attorney. Now, I want you to look at the date. He's not alive anymore when this was settled. His widow in Lynchburg in 1854 is finishing his pension. That is just before the Civil War. And what does it say? Now, this is written by the attorney. Quote, the certificate of the Comptroller of North Carolina does not show that the soldier referred to in his certificate was a man of color. It's quote, right? That was because it was coming to the attorney. There was a problem. Oh, this guy wasn't a man of color? I mean, what's the story here? So the attorney is going to write, ultimately, in the end, in answer to this, I will say no such distinction was made on the muster rolls or in any certificate given to free Negroes from North Carolina or Virginia. Both black and white, if free persons, stood on the same footing as militiamen, no distinction being made to color. So is it not a strange circumstance that through the American Revolution, nobody in the military made distinctions of color? But you go 50 years later, everybody's making distinctions of color. Strange, right? Because of that, because there was no distinctions of color on these forms, we have no clear idea how many served. We don't. It's a lot. Probably more than we thought. My guess, and I'm just taking what other people have done before me, try to put it into numbers. How many black Virginians served in the Continental Army from 1775 to the war's end? I say somewhere close to 500. The Navy, 100, maybe more. I'm just going by pensions and my guesses. Militia, it's a lot more. Because remember, you're not enlisting in the militia. It's compulsory. You have to. So just look at those numbers alone. If that is the number. All right. So what I did in Chesterfield County on the Chesterfield Barracks side is I wanted to say, let's not forget these guys. Let's not forget these guys that suffered, endured, died of disease, got shot on the battlefield. All of that stuff needs to be remembered. So we have 3 signs going up next month on historic grounds at Chesterfield Courthouse to remember who was there. One of which is the black soldiers who served there. Another are the ones who we really forget about, which are the women. Every Continental company, every regiment is 8 to 10 companies, had to recruit and pay 2 to 3 women per company to be laundresses that would follow them, march with them, camp with them as laundresses. They're there. In fact, the first people who were remembered to be put in the hospital at Chesterfield Courthouse was 14 men of the Virginia line and 2 laundresses who were in the hospital together. And just a reminder of that location, the barracks and the training grounds for the Continental Soldiers of Virginia there. So if you really want to study this topic, one of the guys I really trust is historian John Reese, who's been studying this a long time. And his book, you can put on your phone right now and have it in a day. I think it's on all the other stuff you want to purchase. It's there. So his title, They Were Good Soldiers, by John Reese, will give you a really good snapshot, not just about Virginians, but all of the Army who was there. Okay? Thank you. All right.
Thank you so much, John. We'll now take some questions from the audience. Just make sure that you speak into the microphone because this will be recorded. So raise your hand and I'll come to you with the microphone.
Hi, thank you. I've got 2 questions. When you talked about the end of the war and that those enslaved men were deemed free, were their previous owners compensated?
Yes and no. Yes and no. They asked for compensation, but the Virginia Assembly, like most of the assemblies, most of the new states, were broke. We're broke. So some of the states tried doing a layered payment plans of sorts, but most of the states didn't compensate. Everything was half-hearted. And again, back to the notion that if they're asking, I don't know, somebody who's just a small planter, right? Maybe he has 10 to 12 enslaved people. That's a bigger difference from somebody who has 100. And most of the people who let their slaves go and substitute were usually the smaller, and that means they don't have as much money. So they're really trying to get money from the state. But the state has none. Yep. Was that 1 or 2 questions? I'm sorry. That was the one? All right. There you go.
Yeah, thanks for an excellent presentation. When they were in the Army, were they treated differently and given jobs that were not the same as the white soldiers? Or how did their daily existence go compared to?
Sure. In some of South Carolina is always the strange one. Some, like South Carolina, preferred that their soldiers that were black were just musicians. They tried to do that. And to some degree, it might have happened a little bit. The problem is the Continental Army was so reduced by numbers that anybody that had objections to it had to succumb to the fact that manpower was manpower. Now, as far as the circumstances of their living with the other soldiers, there's zero evidence about anybody being treated differently. If you were, I'll give you William Flora, for example, right? I've tried to find this out. I'm pretty certain that he made it to being a non-commissioned officer, right? Which is back to him being a corporal or sergeant over white men. I'm trying to figure out if any of these black men got to be NCOs. Because if you can see any of them become NCOs, it would tell you that there is no treatment that's different. Mm-hmm. And it also depends on who the officers are, right? The Virginia brigades, North Carolina brigades, you tend to find that everybody's doing everything the same, right? And that's usually what I know. Now, as far as the northern units, again, if you look at the Rhode Island Regiment, those guys, there's a nickname for them because somebody in the unit came up with it, brothers in arms. They called themselves that. It's very interesting, right? So that's all I can give you on that one.
My other question is, which Don Troiani prints were you in? Was it Civil War ones? Or
so yeah, there's a couple of Civil War ones. The one that I'm going to say that I didn't ever pose for, wasn't there, and I'm trying to think twice I posed for him, and the Civil War ones I was in, am I in the Irish Brigade one? Can't remember if that's the last one. But the Revolutionary War one that I definitely didn't pose for was Cowpens. And one day, it's the Devil of a Whippin', I don't know whatever his title is for that. And I looked at it and I went, oh, that's a great painting. Wow, this is really cool. And I saw myself with my musket and bayonet like this, and I'm like, I did that pose in my Civil War stuff. But that's what happens, so yeah.
I've been trying to figure out
Yes.
what actually happened to the Ethiopian regiment after they left here, because I'm reading how incensed the Patriots were to have their slaves taken away that way. So I've heard different versions of what happened to them when they went north up the bay. A lot of them died or got sick, or I don't know what happened.
Yeah, it's a great question. So what you have is the Royal Ethiopian Regiment and their white cousin regiment, which was the Loyal Queen's Own Regiment. Again, they're all loyalists from down this way. They all got taken on ships to New York, right? Some of the Queen's Own, which were Tidewater loyalists, some of them went into the Queen's Rangers of John Graves Simcoe, who do come back to Virginia. Some of the other troops in the Royal Ethiopian Regiment, some of those guys just kind of disappear when they get to New York, just kind of filters out. And a lot of them probably did what a lot of folks in that same situation did, is they started melding themselves into the greater New York community and wound up just going on with their lives. Some of the British regiment took them on. You do find a spattering of some British regiments just, come on in, we'll take you in because we're short on recruits. Some became musicians. It's just, but again, the evidence is in if we had somebody write it down specifically, which we don't have. What we usually have is officers or officials who are writing, oh, by the way, there are some of these people serving in this and that, but they never give us numbers. That's all we get.
I read about Gwyn's Island.
Yeah.
Did a lot of them die there? And
Yeah.
I wondered if there's any evidence in Gwyn's Island that they were there at all.
Yeah, I mean, they're under constant shelling from, American Virginia forces for a while. The one thing that Dunmore did is anybody he can fit on a ship when he left Virginia, he took with him, including a lot of those guys, the Royal Ethiopians, and if they had family members, some of them did, took them all to New York, right? When he left, they left. But he couldn't take everybody. And that was noted too, is that I can't take everybody. So
Any other questions?
these are hard questions, man. I can't, man. All right. I'll linger for a few minutes too if you want.
That's great. Yeah, he'll stick by for any questions afterward. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. We hope you come out to our next lecture October 5th. Thank you. And also feel free to visit our museum down in the lowest level of this building as well, which is our York County History Museum. And enjoy the rest of the event that goes till about 3:30 today. All right, thank you.
Should just walk down the street yelling liberty or death. Just test them and see what happens.